Good afternoon. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. For those who might be watching, streaming, I'm Napoleon Bell. I'm the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion here at the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas General Division. We'd like to welcome you online, and we'd like to welcome everyone here for coming together for this important conversation and taking the time to do that. Today, we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, often shortened to DEI. Now, it's a term many of us hear regularly, but it can mean different things to different people. For some, it's about workplace culture. For others, it's about fairness and opportunity. And for many, there are questions about what it really involves and what it doesn't. Our goal today is simple: to have an open, practical conversation. We'll talk about the core principles behind diversity, equity, and inclusion, why organizations focus on it, and address some of the common myths or misconceptions that tend to surround it. This isn't about the buzzwords or checklists. It's about understanding how we work together, how we serve others, and how we create environments where professionalism, respect, and fairness are consistent and intentional. So we encourage thoughtful listening and honest reflection. As our panelists share their perspectives, we will offer some time toward the end for all of you to be able to ask some questions if you have that. So let's get started, and I want to introduce our panelists. Our first panelist is Judge Kimberly Cocroft. She serves as the judge of the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas here in Columbus, where she presides over felony, criminal, and major civil cases. She has served on the bench since 2009 and is recognized for her extensive legal experience and commitment to fairness, professionalism, and community engagement within the judicial system. Judge Cocroft earned her Bachelor of Arts in Psychology and a Master of Arts in Sports Management from The Ohio State University before receiving her Juris Doctor from the Ohio State University Moritz College of Law in 2000. Before joining the bench, Judge Cocroft gained broad legal and governmental experience. She served as a law clerk to Justice Alice Roby Resnick at the Supreme Court of Ohio, worked as an associate attorney with Buckingham, Doolittle, and Burroughs, LLP, and later held the position of Deputy Chief Counsel for Civil Matters in the Office of Governor Ted Strickland. These roles have provided her with extensive experience in appellate practice, civil litigation, and state government operations. During her tenure on the bench, Judge Cocroft has overseen a wide range of complex criminal and civil proceedings and has emphasized impartiality, judicial integrity, and public understanding of the court system. She also served in leadership with the court, including being selected by her colleagues to serve as administrative judge of the General Division in 2022, a role responsible for helping oversee the court's operations and administration. Judge Cocroft continues to serve the residents of Franklin County by upholding the rule of law and ensuring that all individuals who come before the court are treated with fairness, dignity, and respect. Please put your hands together for Judge Kimberly Cocroft. Next to her, we have Attorney Stephen S. Francis. He has 35 years of experience as a public and private sector lawyer and diversity professional, which includes work with the City of Columbus as the Chief Diversity Officer, developing a 10-year plan to double workforce diversity in Columbus Police and Fire Divisions. His legal and diversity work history also includes Honda of America, Bank One Corporation, the Public Utilities Commission of Ohio, Administrative Law Judge, and was Chief Legal Counsel for the Ohio Department of Development Office of Legal and Legislative Affairs. He has also served as a corporate executive, leading several company-wide functions, including diversity and inclusion communications and media relations, advertising, government and community relations, and philanthropy. He also served as a training facilitator in diversity awareness, cultural competence, and implicit bias. Attorney Francis is co-founder and past president of Central Ohio Diversity Consortium, a diversity and inclusion best practices clearinghouse established in 2006 that promotes the advancement of diversity and inclusion in public, private, governmental, nonprofit, and academic institutions throughout Central Ohio. Please put your hands together for Attorney Francis. And next to him, we have Attorney Jolie Havens. She's a partner in the Voorhees, Columbus, and Houston offices and the immediate past chair of the firm's healthcare group. She also is the firm's first and immediate past chief diversity and inclusion officer, where she led the firm's strategy, policies, and practices related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. She maintains a national practice focused on healthcare transactions, contracting compliance, and provider practitioner reimbursement with significant experience involving hospitals and physicians. She has counseled providers, practitioners, and other stakeholders across the industry, including adult and children's hospitals and health systems. She counsels on legal issues involving mergers and acquisitions, Medicare, Medicaid, and private payer billing, coding documentation and coverage, compliance with federal and state fraud and abuse laws, and various other healthcare laws, professional disciplinary actions, and legal and business implications of medical and recreational cannabis, gender-affirming care, and reproductive health care. Attorney Havens has consistently ranked as a leading lawyer in healthcare by Chambers and Partners, the best lawyers in America in healthcare law, and Columbus CEO, Best Lawyers Healthcare Law, and receiving the Chambers and Partners Outstanding Contribution to Furthering the Advancement of Diversity in the Legal Profession Award. Please put your hands together for Attorney Havens. So we appreciate all of you for coming, and if I missed anything, I want to give you the opportunity. If there's anything that you want to add to your bios or to get things started, that'll be good. All right, because they had some more stuff in their bios, but I had to tweak it down a little bit. So we appreciate you for coming. So let's go ahead and get started with this conversation. So at its core, what does diversity and equity and inclusion actually mean, right? What does it mean to you, and what have you found? And so I'm going to open this up to all three of you, and so whichever one wants to go first. And it should be on. Yeah. There you go.
Well, thanks for the question, Napoleon. I get this question asked all the time, and I actually made a promotional video and posted it on my website about the what, why, and how of DEI. But in its basic terms, diversity is a fact. No walls, laws, executive orders, or even State of the Union speeches can prevent the inevitability of diversity. As long as people continue to marry folks that don't look like them, adopt children from across the world that don't look like them, there's going to be diversity. And in fact, there will be more diversity and not less, unless you put people in concentration camps and stuff like that. The inclusion part is very easy as well. It's investment in that diversity to provide you with the best outcomes. And so inclusion prevents you with the business case for diversity, because if you include the rich diversity in your problem solving, decision making, product development, service delivery, you will be head and shoulders better than your competition that does not include diversity in all those important things. And then equity is something like, I like to use a visual for this. Everybody is uniquely different. Steve Francis does not exist anywhere else. Even if I was white, black, blue, purple, there would be only one Steve Francis. So that fingerprint qualifies me to be a unique, diverse individual. So I like to put it this way. I can't give each one of you one of those bottles of water and tell you, hey, this is what you need for the rest of your life. Good luck. I haven't treated you any differently than anybody else. I've given you the same thing. But how much sense does it make to give the same thing to uniquely diverse individuals who have unique needs and equitable needs to be able to gain access to opportunity and succeed? So knowing that everybody's uniquely different and doesn't start at the same place in the starting line of life, our job in equity is to ensure that they can finish at the same place with their unique difference if they choose to. And that's my protracted definition. I'm sorry.
So for me, on the DEI front, there's sort of the components of DEI that Steve talked about, but to me it sort of boils down to people, equitable access, and accountability. So it's first about people, right? It's how we treat each other. It's how organizations treat us. It's do we feel seen? Do we feel not only present, meaning diverse in there in terms of being there, but do we feel included? Do we feel seen and heard as well? And then we're able to show up, with our authentic selves. I think it's then about equitable access to, opportunity, to treatment, to information, all the tools that you need to actually be successful. Are you able to step in there and be successful on your own merits? And then I think a huge piece of DEI is accountability. If we've got people who are in, life or otherwise within an organization that are sort of undermining the ability of certain folks to show up and be successful on their own merits, then what is the repercussion for that? And I think DEI is great, but DEI has to be coupled with accountability for it to have teeth.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for coming. Happy Women's History Month. I want to start there. And I want to acknowledge Judge Reese, who's in the back, who just took a bite. But I am grateful that he is here, grateful for each of you that is present. And so I'm also honored to be here with my former law school classmate, Ms. Havens, and Mr. Francis, whom I know personally. I was trying to think about a definition that didn't include the words. And so please forgive me for using notes, but I'm with two heavy hitters, so I had to write my thoughts down. I guess the definition depends on whom you ask. I know that everybody has heard the phrase that DEI means didn't earn it, that you are in a place where you should not be. There are others who believe that DEI means that you've definitely earned it, that you've had to work a little harder and prove a little more than the traditional person who may share the same position. And so what I settled on is that DEI is the intentional decision to create and foster an environment where all facets of a person's lived experience are acknowledged, considered in decision-making processes, and respected in tangible ways, and where the organization's private walk matches its public talk. And so for me, DEI doesn't work if you are saying one thing and then doing another. I think that there has to be a tangible demonstration to the entirety of an organization's body, and then there has to be consistency in terms of messaging. So that's what I would say.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Very good. So, you touched upon my next question that I wanted to talk about is, the common myth is that diversity, equity, inclusion, DEI, lowers standards. Where does that perception come from? And is it accurate?
I was waiting for this question. And anytime someone mentions DEI, they're associating it with a problem or a challenge. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is not a problem. In fact, they flipped it and they've said, we've got to get rid of the problem because it holds everybody back, or it's reverse discrimination on us other folks. So I think the best way I can answer this is diversity adds to whatever existed. It doesn't take anything away. It adds value because that diversity is going to bring different thought, different ideas, different lived experiences, different perspectives. If everyone in here was a white male, we'd still have diversity because they're raised by single parents or they're raised in Alabama versus New York. That diversity adds value. It doesn't take anything away. And the whole thing has been brought up by sort of this concept called white fragility, which means that folks are vilifying DEI because they're not used to, the majority's not used to hearing stuff about other people other than them. When I was counseling clients, they were like, Black Lives Matter, it's in the end zone, it's on the baseball diamond, it's on the street give me a break. I'm tired of hearing about Black Lives Matter. That's the personification of white fragility, because they're not used to that. And so that feels threatening to them. But it's not threatening. It's like empowering, really. And so we have to change our mindset on how we look at it. It depends on who you ask.
Totally agree with you, Steve. And I think this also touches on sort of the idea of the myth of meritocracy, right? The idea that how things have always been done historically is based on merit, when the reality of it is how things have been done historically means that certain people have had advantages that other people have not had, right? We don't all start out in the same place. And I think that inherent in the idea that with DEI you're lowering standards, I'm just going to be really blunt, is the idea that the best person for any job is a straight white male. And I know some fantastic straight white males, but I also know some fantastic people who are not straight white males. And what DEI seeks to do is create a greater pool of people who are actually qualified and ensure that everyone who is qualified actually gets a chance to be successful, right? It's not substituting in someone who is of a lesser qualification. It's merely saying, instead of looking at the pool of qualified people as being this very small group of people, we're going to expand that pool. But the thing you have to realize is that for people who have benefited from the prior inequity, the prior myth of meritocracy, that feels like a takeaway to them, right? So for people who have benefited from inequity, when you're trying to implement equity, then that feels like a takeaway. So I think that, again, just recognizing that and realizing that there are going to be headwinds, there is going to potentially be some pushback. But again, I think that's why this conversation today is so important. It's easy to say, oh, this is politics, we're not going to talk about it, or oh, this is too complicated to solve, no one can solve it, it just is what it is. Every discussion like this, every time you have a one-on-one discussion with someone, every time you are willing to open up your heart and mind to hear someone else's perspective and their lived experience and to try to understand where they're coming from and why they feel the way they feel, that's a step forward. So, kudos to everybody who made time to be here today, because you are taking a step forward, even if it doesn't feel like it.
Ditto to all of that. I think that the myth comes from social media, from legacy media, from political circles. It's become a politicized term to create levels and layers of division in our society when you talk about woke culture and DEI and people having access to opportunity, not recognizing, as the panelist has said, that each of us falls into some dimension of diversity. And so if we speak against diversity, we are literally speaking against ourselves if we believe that diversity only relates to people who look like me or people who are differently abled or people who are LGBTQ+. So I think that's where the myth starts. And I think that if people are honest, they would have to admit that the only reason that the myths resonate is because there is some part of that person that wants to believe that what is being said is actually true. And so I think there may be the inclination to believe that there are people who are inferior, who are taking away opportunities from people who are more deserving of those opportunities. And I think this is probably one of the most difficult conversations to have, because it requires a level of self-assessment and honesty that sometimes people don't want to embrace. And so I think that's how the myths are perpetuated, just from the world in which we are living. And it's a mechanism used to divide and to conquer.
Yeah. Well, let me ask, and to kind of follow up what you're talking about, though, is how do we approach those conversations? How do we and how have you been able to gather those to be able to have this honest and frank conversation without it evolving into what we see on the media or social media? How do you have that conversation?
And this relates to one of your questions I was waiting for also, can DEI efforts remain neutral and non-political in professional environments? DEI is not political. It's been politicized. Right. And so there's nothing political about DEI. It's a business driver. It's a business imperative. It's a societal imperative. And so I've had that confrontation many times with my clients. Well, we're not supposed to talk about politics. DEI is not politics. And so the universal 3 words to increasing mutual understanding on this topic is help me understand. So you have 2 convergent views on gun control, let's say. Somebody's over here and somebody's over here. And I'll say, help me understand the value of an AK assault rifle, because I think they should be outlawed. And they listen, and then I'll help you understand why I feel that they should be outlawed. So I'm willing to listen. Listening is the golden egg for helping people open their minds and view other points of view. So you have this help me understand, you bring everybody to a mutual understanding. Not saying that they have to divorce themselves from their understanding, but at least they've taken the time to listen and understand why others feel differently than them. And that's the start of non-confrontational dialogue about this important topic. Help me understand why you believe abortion should be outlawed, and I'll help you understand why I think it should be a matter of choice. And once you discuss, they might learn something, or you might learn something, which could change your opinion.
Absolutely yes to all of that. I think another piece of this that can help with conversations. So I'll tell you, when I started, let's say, being curious and asking a lot of questions at my firm about why we did some things the way we were doing them, right? I can imagine there may have been some people who looked at me as a agitator, a complainer, right? Being negative. And I was not gonna let that be the narrative. So what I said was, no, at least in this workplace piece, I've spent my entire career at that firm, almost 30 years. I am asking these questions from a place of honor and deep respect, and it is because I love this organization so much that I am willing to say the hard thing. I am willing to say when we, as an organization, or when individual people need to be doing better, need to be reflecting. And I think, for those of us who are trying to have these conversations and open up that dialogue, don't let people flip that script and have you be the complainer, the negative one, the agitator. No. As Steve said, there are studies upon studies out there that show that diverse businesses, if you can't get people to understand why this is the right thing to do for people, right? If you can't get them to wrap their heart and mind around it, then you've got the business case that you can point to. There are, tons of studies that suggest that. So DEI is everyone. It is everything, and some organizations will try to kind of, silo it a little bit. It's not. It needs to live everywhere. It needs to be a topic that we are not afraid to talk about. There needs to be permission within an organization to have a tough conversation. There needs to be space to be uncomfortable and to say, I don't understand. To Steve's point, help me, right? But I think one of the greatest barriers that I hear when I talk with people is, how they're viewed when they raise that issue. Don't fall into that trap. You're raising that issue because you care about the organization and because you want things to be better for everyone.
I think that you have to take advantage of opportunities to speak about these issues when they are presented. And I'll give you a real-time example today. I had a case that involved a former member, or maybe current, I don't know, of the Aryan Brotherhood. And so as I was reading through his pre-sentence report, there was a conviction where he, and this is no pun intended, used some very colorful language to describe persons who look like me. And so I just had a very candid conversation with him. I could tell that he was very nervous about what I might say, given what I had read. But I explained to him how karmic the universe can be, and you don't know in whose hands you might find yourself. And so it's imperative, it's important to approach every person, every circumstance with a level of respect, with a level of humility and honor. And so I just took the time to have that conversation with someone who probably under ordinary circumstances wouldn't have had that conversation with me. I definitely respect your point about help me understand, but the truth is that there are people who know and acknowledge that the issues exist and they have no desire to understand. They don't care how terrible it is. They don't care how bad things are. They don't care how upside down the environment might be. It is easier to stay stuck in the current framework. And I think that we have to acknowledge that reality, is that as many times as we may speak about an issue, that might not be the thing that effectuates change, but it doesn't change your responsibility to still speak things aloud and to have those conversations. And so I think it's just leaning into every opportunity, even when it's a scary thing to do, even when you are uncertain about the outcomes, even when you potentially could be standing alone. I still think you have the obligation to speak aloud those things that need to be challenged and then changed.
Can I cite one more example that relates to your Aryan Nation one? And first, to piggyback off what you said, Maya Angelou says, not to know is bad, but not to want to know is even worse. And that's what Judge Cocroft was talking about. I worked at the AG's office, and we used to have lunch in the lunchroom and play cards during lunchtime. And there was a white gentleman, older gentleman, that we used to play with all the time. Very nice guy. And as I was moving on to a different job, they had a little bit of a get-together for me. And after it, he stayed behind and said, "Steve, you opened my eyes to a lot of things. I learned a lot from you." I said, "Wow, that's great." And he showed me something. It was a jackknife, and it was a Ku Klux Klan jackknife that he had gotten as a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And I said, "Why did you show me that?" He said, "I wanted you to know that what I used to believe in, I don't believe in anymore, because I saw for myself that there are very accomplished, professional, kind black folk that are debunking the myths that I grew up with." So.
Thank you for that, all of you. Kind of changing gears here just a little bit, though. You talked about, DEI is for everyone, but the common pushback was, is DEI the same as affirmative action, right? With quotas and all that. So is this truthful, or was that something that started early on? Is DEI about, getting the quotas for, as in with what affirmative action was, counting the numbers?
I think that affirmative action was a byproduct of discrimination and racism. Even with the Emancipation Proclamation, and that's why Juneteenth was celebrated, it took several months, almost a year, before folks were actually free. They resisted it, This was their cash cow. Slavery was making them a lot of money, and they didn't want to give that up, and killed the president over it. But I think, you have to almost force people to do the right thing, unfortunately. And that's what affirmative action was all about, because they weren't going to do it on their own. I used to have bosses that said, "I want to get to the point where we don't need diversity, equity. I want to work you out of a job, Steve." I said, "Well, unfortunately, that might not happen, but meanwhile, I'll do the level best I can." But it's almost like the Voter Rights Act. It was, suspended. And they said, "Well, we don't have a problem anymore in southern states. There's no pre-clearance that's needed." Are you kidding me? Look what's happening. All these voter restrictive laws and all the gerrymandering and all the literally drawing districts so that they will never leave power. And that's why these laws are needed. It's not DEI, it's because of diversity, and it's because of the racism that certain people have had to tolerate over the centuries that affirmative action has been legislated, codified.
Totally agree with you. I think that DEI and affirmative action are sort of different philosophies to try to get to the same place. And to Steve's point, we haven't always been able to rely on people to quote unquote do the right thing, right? So we've had to incentivize them. to maybe make choices they would not otherwise be inclined to make. And I think that, you know, particularly within the workplace, this kind of also goes back to the idea of, you know, is it political? And, you know, is it, I mean, from my standpoint, and what I always tell people, I'm like, it's about humanity. We all want the same things. We may have different ideas about how to get there, and we can have a conversation about that, but we should all want the same things. And if you want rights only for people who look like you, love like you know, believe what you believe, you know, all of that, you know, that's privilege you want to enjoy, right? That's not necessarily you wanting equity or equality, you know, for everyone. And I think one of the key pieces is, and I'm going to butcher a really lovely quote by Brene Brown, but what she talks about is believing people when they tell you what their experience is, as opposed to you thinking you know better than they do what their experience is, right? And I think that if we're all willing to sort of suspend our idea of what we think someone else's experience is in the world and actually listen to them as to what that experience is, I think that also is a huge, huge opportunity for progress.
I agree. I view affirmative action, well, DEI is not the same for me as affirmative action and quotas. Affirmative action is used to address historical discrimination that limited access to certain institutionals' opportunities. So that, for me, is affirmative action. Quotas would be me saying, I need 1 Miss Carroll and 2 Mr. Sanders and 3 Miss Lavenders. I've got a numerical calculation of how many of a certain kind of person should be in a certain position. And DEI for me is a voluntary decision that organizations make to create an environment that reflects the world in which we are all living. So that's the distinction. There's not necessarily a legal mandate for DEI. There's a business justification. There's a humanistic justification. For me, it's just the right thing to do. I just am fascinated by the fact that this is such a hot button issue for the world in which we are living that is so diverse. When you think about the origins of this country, when you talk about all people being endowed with certain unalienable rights, that wasn't, well, at the time that it was written, it was white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, but it's broader than that. When you talk about on the Statue of Liberty, the new Colossus poem, give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses, that speaks to a diverse community. And so the fact that a country that was founded with diverse principles in mind struggles with the idea of diversity, it's just diabolical. If I'm honest, I don't even understand how or why diverse people can't agree that diversity is necessary. And shout out to Judge Page, who walked in, my colleague, glad to see her also. So yeah, that too.
So, well, let me ask you then, you know, we've talked about diversity, equity, inclusion, and the kind of tenets of it and what it is and what it's not, but, you know, what does a successful diversity, equity, inclusion look like in action? So not just in policy, but in everyday behavior. What does it look like?
You know, there are some days when I'm not sure what it looks like. Honestly, I think it looks like listening to the people who make up the diverse community. I think it looks like being responsive to concerns that are raised by the individuals in the diverse community. I think it looks like being accountable when we recognize that we've missed the mark in terms of our commitment to a diverse community. I think it means acknowledging persons whose experiences are different than my own and not being intimidated or bothered by or fearful of that different experience. It's a lot of different things. And I think that the people who make up the organization get to decide what that looks like, which goes to Ms. Havens, your point about accountability, collecting data, listening to feedback, creating a space. There was one training that we had here at the court about the culture of accountability and the culture of fear, and removing barriers for people to speak aloud those challenges that they see, that they experience, that they witness. And so I think that a diverse community looks like removing the culture of fear so that people have the ability to speak honestly about what their experience is in professional spaces. It looks like a lot of different things. If you haven't gathered that, it looks like a lot of different things to me. But I think that each of us has a role in deciding what that environment is, even though I am serving as a judge, and Judge Page and Judge Reese, and we have an administrative team. Each of us is involved in creating the kind of community we want, or we should be involved in creating the kind of community that we want to see. And so my hope for each of us as we navigate what is a new space for the court is that we are given the latitude and have the strength and the willingness to add to the kind of diverse community that we want to see.
I think it's also about embracing, as other folks have mentioned, sort of continuous learning and continuous improvement, right? I don't know that there's ever a time when DEI is done. I think Steve would always have a job. I think that it's always about learning and being better than we were last week, last month, last year, right? And being willing to sort of check our own egos and say, we don't have this all figured out every day, and that's okay. But if we're all rowing in the same direction and we're clear about what our goals are, you know, we can continue improving. I also think it's realizing that each of us has a sphere of influence, right? Each of us has our circle of people. We have the ability every day to support greater diversity, equity, inclusion, or to potentially uphold the barriers that have historically, you know, cut against it. You know, it's everything from what comments will you tolerate in your presence to, you know, what are you, you know, willing to speak your mind on? And I think that's just also each of us being really clear about sort of who we are, what we stand for, and what we will and won't tolerate, you know, within, again, sort of that sphere of influence that we have.
Attorney Havens is spot on. It's an evolution. It never is. Just like you have new goals in HR every year, you have to have new goals in DEI every year. I think that diversity, there's no organization that's exactly alike. And so success looks differently in Franklin County courts than it does in Children's Hospital, than it does in City Hall. And so the key is being in tune with the culture of the organization, its mission, vision, values, make sure they're lived, and understand that it's an evolution. You're never finished, and you have to keep working at culture. And I can also answer it by asking this question. I used to ask people in training all the time. How do your hearts and stomachs feel on Sunday night about Monday morning? And people would have various answers to that. And the reason people have different answers is the culture is schizophrenic from department to department, from person to person. And so the goal is to weave some thread of consistency throughout the silos within the organization so that you have a consistent culture that is in line with principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So I've got another question on that, but I'm going to go with this one, so I've got to remember this one. Although we talk about, you know, goals and goal settings for an organization, how can organizations measure whether their DEI efforts are meaningful rather than just symbolic?
I can tell you what we do at our firm, and I know a lot of other organizations do too. I mean, we do look at the data, but there's the quantitative part. There's the, you know, who's here, who have we hired, who's getting, you know, what work, who's getting promoted. You know, there's all of that, and that's very important. But to me, I think the bigger piece, and this kind of goes to what Steve was just talking about, is the you know, the non-quantitative piece. How do people feel showing up? You know, what is their experience? Is their experience what we want it to be? And when they tell us it isn't, are we listening? You know, so I think there's really those two pieces that have to be a part of any sort of honest evaluation of what you're doing and whether it is quote unquote, working. I think the other piece that I've seen in a lot of organizations is they are very focused, and this sort of circles back, they're very focused on hiring. They're less focused on retention. Because retention's the harder part, right? So much easier to hire people with, again, maybe just the best of intentions. But the question is, what experience are you giving them when they show up, right? Are they feeling meaningfully included? Are they getting access to information, opportunity, tools, all the things they need to be successful? And you can do all the fantastic hiring you want, but if you are not creating a positive experience for people when they are there, they're not going to stay. So you're not going to be able to, achieve your goals of a, greater diversity in your workplace if you don't spend meaningful time and focus and being very, very intentional about what people's experiences are when they are actually with you.
May I ask before the subject matter experts, when you've worked with organizations, what have you done to facilitate transparent presentation of feedback? So that you can do the proper analysis about whether DEI is effective, so that people aren't afraid or intimidated to give really an honest assessment. How have you helped organizations manage that?
Well, there's surveys, annual surveys that companies give, and ironically at Honda, they had a class action race and gender suit pending, so we had to suspend the employee surveys because I made sure that there were questions in there about DEI. How do they feel? Is it fair? Do they feel like they have a voice? All those kind of things. And I couldn't ask those questions because it was in litigation. But, to Ms. Haven's point, I worked at Honda with a guy who was ex-military, and Guy, you'll appreciate this. He said, have you been doing the 7 T's? I said, what are you talking about, Steve? His name was Steve, too. He says, take time to talk to the troops. And many leaders don't take the time to simply go out on the production floor, which was Honda's case, and ask people, how you doing? What's going on? How can I help you? How can I support you be successful here? I'm here for you. That altruism, right? And so we just don't take the time to talk to folks. And you made that point as well.
I agree. That was my question. Sorry.
Did you want to add to that answer?
I would just say I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said. And I think that, we all have the opportunity to lead by example. And one of the things that I always wanted to make sure of within our firm is that if somebody felt there wasn't anyone else they could go to, they knew they could always come to me. And that I was going to hear them, and I wasn't going to automatically dismiss what they were saying, because again, that's their experience, not how I imagine their experience. That's what they're experiencing. And honestly, at that point, it's almost like how things are almost don't even matter, because the fact is that's their reality, and that's what we need to address, right? So I can sit there all day and say, oh, I think someone may be overacting or overreacting, or, oh, I don't know why they would feel that way. That seems unreasonable. Again, not my call. That's that person's place to say, this is how I am experiencing the workplace, and this is what works for me and what doesn't. And I think any organization that is going to be remotely successful in this space has to humble themselves enough to realize that there's always going to be something they can learn and do better.
And one other quick comment. I used to tell my client, should we be in Diversity Inc. as one of the top 10 business for diversity, equity, inclusion? I said, no, those are pay to play. And actually, it's the opposite reaction that I get when I see those lists. All I say is, oh, they paid a lot of money to get in there. But if I went down and asked an employee walking down the hall, they'd tell me totally different. This is a crappy place to work. So, and you have to have that ombudsman, that confidential line for folks to call if in fact they're struggling.
Well, so that leads right into my next question, when we talk about leadership. So what role does leadership play in advancing or hindering diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives?
I think leadership has to lead. I think that leaders have to be the first persons who acknowledge the necessity or the importance of DEI, and then lead by example in terms of participation, in terms of encouraging participation, in terms of addressing issues when they are raised by employees. And so I think that the life and or death of DEI starts with and may die with a lack of leadership involvement. If employees are buying into the concept of DEI, but the leaders who are managing those issues when they are raised don't believe in the necessity of DEI, then there's a problem. There is a huge disconnect that exists, and then people become discouraged, and then they don't believe that we take those ideas seriously, and then they retreat into those shells and aren't transparent and honest about their experiences. And so I think it's critically important. It is mission central to the idea and the concept of DEI that leadership is fully involved.
DEI, belonging, the word belonging is a byproduct of DEI. And so you'll see these slogans in organizations. We want to create an environment where everyone feels like they belong. And that sounds great. But have you ever met an employee named everybody? You can't put a generic term in there because belonging is uniquely different for everybody in this room. Everybody in this room has a different way that they feel they need to be engaged and supported to feel like they belong. So that's hard work. Leaders have to have hard work to reach out to everybody on their team and make sure that they understand that they're supported and that there's some resource there that's going to help them truly feel like they feel a part of the team.
I agree with all of that. I mean, bottom line is leadership sets the tone in every organization, full stop, you know? And the reality of it is leadership in many organizations is still straight white males, right? So then the question becomes, how do you bring these folks into the fold, right? Again, if it's not a hearts and minds analysis, there is plenty of data out there that builds the business case. But I think that, again, you have got to bring leadership along. And, you know, it would be great if DEI efforts started at leadership and trickled down, but oftentimes that's not the case. Oftentimes it's more of a grassroots, sort of initiative, which again, can still make progress. But if you don't bring leadership into the fold, you're not going to make the progress that you otherwise would have. So that's just the reality of it, that connection with leadership and getting leadership buy-in and getting vocal leadership support. Not just, I'm neutral, from a public standpoint, but, I'll say I agree with you in private. No. Vocal leadership support, critical.
Okay, so I've got one more question, and I'll open it up to the audience. And so if you raise your hand, or I'll come over with this mic because we don't have the other mic, to be able to ask the question so that we can capture it on video. So my last question is, what is the most significant advice for ensuring that DEI initiatives lead to lasting cultural shifts rather than the temporary flavor of the month programs? What is the most significant advice for ensuring that DEI initiatives lead to lasting cultural shifts rather than the temporary flavor of the month program?
For me, the concept of DEI is a legacy concept. It's how do you want to be remembered? How do you want your organization to be viewed? When I was in college, I had a mentor, Dr. Lee Jones, who would always tell us that image without substance is counterfeit. And so if what we are doing is just performative work to check the boxes and to pretend as if these kinds of ideas are important to us, then so be it. I don't know that you can change people who don't have a heart for this kind of work. But for me, it's about legacy. It's about, how do I want to be remembered? How do I want the organizations to which I am connected to be remembered? Do I want the legacy to be one in which every voice was honored and respected, or do I want to be a part of organizations where there is an intentional decision to exclude persons whose experiences are different than mine? So I think it's a heart thing for me. So much of this topic is a heart thing for me. And either you believe in it or you don't. Either you're willing to do the work or you're not. Either you want your organization to be elevated by including diverse voices, or you're comfortable with the status quo. And so for me, it's how do I want this organization to be remembered? And when I served as administrative judge, that was kind of my guiding star. How do I want the organization to be viewed in the community that I was elected to serve, which is why the DEI effort was important to me. The Access to Justice Committee that Judge Page chaired initially was important to me. Creating a portal for defendants to pay their fines and other sanctions online, because that is the gateway to expungement, to sealing records of convictions. So those are the kinds of things that were important to me, translating forms so that we could create the kind of inclusive community for Spanish and Nepali and Somali defendants who appeared, partnering with justice and policy programs for youth of incarcerated parents. I wanted the legacy of my service and of my colleagues' service to be one where we walked what we talked when we were campaigning. And so that's what I work to try to do. So it's about legacy for me.
At Honda, I was trained on metrics, and everything was evolving around statistical analysis and metrics. And so I built DEI into the strategic framework at Honda, and there were 4 organization-wide pillars. And so I was able to convince the Japanese executives to add diversity as one of those organization-wide pillars. So there were 5. And every month they would come before the chief operating committee and get measured on those pillars. So they had to be ready and prepared to report on their progress. You know, the green circle, the yellow delta, and the red X on how they were doing to advance DEI. Diversity costs money. And so they say what gets measured gets done. Mm-hmm. That's true. But what's funded gets measured, and then what's measured gets done. So you have to fund this work in a way that it will be likely to succeed in order for it to be successful. Once you get skin in the game from everybody, then they pay attention to the stuff. When their money is being allocated through their budget to support DEI, some aspect of it, they pay attention.
Also true. I think the couple pieces of it for me is that we have to acknowledge that we're not done, right? We still need these efforts because there are still barriers in society, within organizations all over, that hamper the success of certain groups of people. They just do. And us not wanting them to be there doesn't mean that they aren't, right? And so I think for me, acknowledging that truth and speaking that truth is incredibly important, because I think it's hard to say, well, nothing more needs to be done. You know, sort of the trend has passed, if you will, if you think that, you know, those barriers are gone. They aren't. I mean, the greatest beneficiaries of DEI are white women, hands down, just is, right? And if you're paying attention at all to what's going on in the world right now, you see there's so much more work left to be done. And I guess I would just say that for those of us who support this area and might be feeling a little heavy, you know, or bewildered at times right now, you know, events like this give me hope. There's a lot of good that is still happening in the world. And there's an opportunity for each of us every day before we lay our head on the pillow at night to put some good out into the world in a way that we feel solid about. So just remember the power that you have every day to be a positive force for change.
Well, thank you for that. Now, going to the audience. Is there anybody that has a question? And I'll have to come to you. No questions? Everything that you came for was answered. Okay, I'm coming this way. And then some, all right? And you got to talk into this because we don't.
Do we have to?
Yes, you have to.
Do I have to stand up too?
Sure, if you want to stand up. Yes. Be proud, come on.
First of all, I would like to thank you guys for your time and expanding the definition of DEI. I don't think I really understood it in the way that I understand it today. So thank you for that. I'm encouraged because we are in the midst of everything that's going on, able to be a part of this conversation today and hear this dialogue. I am discouraged about, I'm just wondering if it's possible for human beings to achieve DEI with our proclivity to want to see people who look like us or want to be around people who look like us, and that's just what we're just more inclined to do, or act on scarcity and, you know, and all those things. So I'm just wondering if it's even possible.
Thank you for the question. And I got the feeling that we're preaching to the choir. However, the choir still needs to rehearse. So please ask these questions. You learn from each other more than you learn from us. What you described is bias. And I used to train people all the time. We are all biased, and we will never be unbiased. The goal is to give people tools and skills so that they can identify their bias once it pops up, because it will, and manage it before it clouds their judgment or leads to bad decisions or wrong decisions. So it's a never-ending battle. You're right, we're human beings, and we gravitate towards sameness and comfort and path of least resistance, right? So we have to work on this every day to make friends with folks who get in different circles with folks who don't look like us or don't think like us, so that we can learn how the other side of the world feels and thinks.
I think this is a diverse community within this room. We've got judges, we've got IT, we've got probation, we've got administration. So there's diversity within this community. I think that Mr. Francis is right. It's how do we break down the walls that keep us limited to persons with whom we are most comfortable. And I think it's an intentional decision that you make every single day to reach out to or to connect with someone who is dissimilar to you, whether that is organizationally, whether that is racially, whether that is gender-based, whether that is political ideology. It is making an intentional decision every day to connect with someone who is dissimilar to you. And it is the most uncomfortable thing to do. And I readily acknowledge that. It's kind of been my lived experience. There are, I think, 723 judges in the state of Ohio, and only 56 are African American. That is less than the 12 to 13% of the population of African Americans. And so I am constantly asked to connect with and to interact with persons whose experience are vastly different than mine in so many respects. But it's what I choose to do. And so it's making that choice to make the connection, no matter how difficult, and maybe even sometimes unwelcome your effort might be. It's just to make that step every day.
The Ku Klux Klan example, would I have sat down every other day and played cards in the lunchroom with a member of the Ku Klux Klan? Probably not. But me not knowing that, I found that he was a great guy. He found I was a great guy. The world, we sang Kumbaya, you know?
Yeah, we have a little mantra at our firm that we call practice the pause. And that's when Steve was talking about bias, it's a bias interrupter. So while my affinity bias may be at play and I may be inclined when I need help on a project to call up someone who reminds me of me, right? Because that's what I'm comfortable with. In our heads, we say practice the pause. How many other people are available to do that work? Who haven't I worked with? Who is this an opportunity for me to build a bridge with, right? And create a relationship and potentially learn something. And I think you also have to be willing to take that risk. The person who's on the other side of that bridge that you're trying to build, they may be there to meet you, they may not be, but that's not a reason not to try. So I think being willing to take that risk pays off.
This is nerve-wracking. Hello, everyone. So we've gotten our foot in the door, right? So how do we overcome some of the social norms of just the basic level of professionalism? Sometimes you feel like you might need to code switch just to be palatable to some other individuals around you. I want to be authentic to myself, but you still want to give yourself a fighting chance, right? Some things as superficial as the way you style your hair. What we say, how you got to turn down your twang a little bit just to be received well, what words of wisdom do you guys have for some of us who are trying to show up authentic but still be perceived as professional?
You heard of bilingual. Some folks have to be bicultural, and they have to practice that day in and day out, while others are just being themselves, right? And so you brought up a great point. You should embrace your skill and agility and adeptness at being multicultural or bicultural, because that's a skill that other people don't have, and they don't even have to practice. So you can turn that switch on and off when you need to. And that's the reality of corporate. I've compromised so much of myself. I'm about a foot shorter than I was just by fighting the battle every day. And you know who you are. That will never change. But you have to, and one thing diversity is about assimilation, not, it's about adaptation, not assimilation. So we want you to be your authentic self when you come in, but we want you to be able to adapt to the values and norms that you have to comply with within that organization. A guy can't bring in a Confederate flag on his hat, right? Because we know that symbol means a whole lot of things to different people. But he can still be a, whatever after he leaves. But that's the beauty of diversity.
I would also say that, the conversation on some of those issues, it only changes if it changes, right? And I think for people within an organization who have a platform to speak out on those things should do that. I'll give you a personal example for me. So I'm a single mom, and I have 2 boys. And one of the things I was always very intentional about doing, if I had to leave the office to pick up my kids or do something with them, was saying, I am leaving the office to get my children, because we are a package deal, right? You get me, you get them. And I had a couple of other female attorneys say to me, you might not want to do that, right? You might not want to be, labeled that way, or you might not want, people to think that. And I just, again, for me, rejected that and said, no, it is absolutely okay for me to be a mother and to need to leave, on that basis, and to not make up that I have a meeting every day at 5:30, miraculously, that I need to be at, right? But I also realized that when I was doing that, I was the chair of a group and I was leading DEI, right? So I had a platform in which I could do that with less risk to me than what some other people may feel. So I think for those of us who do have that ability, I think we also have potentially an obligation, right? If you believe in that, use your voice.
I would say sometimes you have to read the room. Sometimes it's not always the best time to show the full spectrum of who you are. Being a Black woman, and I'll just say it like it is, being a Black woman, I remember through COVID, of course the salons are shut down. I cannot get my hair done, right? So I can't walk around looking crazy at the court. What am I gonna do with my hair? And I really wrestled with the prospect of braiding my hair. And people were like, you braided your hair? Oh my gosh, you're a judge, your hair is braided. I can't believe it. It doesn't make me any less a judge. But I think the timing of when I did it, if I had been in my first year on the bench when there was great concern about the fact that I was appointed, maybe that's not the time for me to show up in all of my ethnic glory. So I think you have to read the room. It doesn't mean that you are less authentic because you are taking steps that protect your professional prospects. There will always be the time for you to show up fully as who you are. But I think what we call code switching, it's an art. It is necessary in many respects for professional survival, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that you aren't still being true to the essence of who you are. It's just recognizing that if I want to achieve this certain next step, and if I want to create space and opportunity for people who look like me, and then we can all be fully authentic in this space, then I'm going to have to take some L's. I'm going to take a few losses so that I can create opportunities for other people, and that's okay.
Good question. Anybody else? Question. We got a lot of time. Oh, yes, sir.
I first want to say thank you all for being here. I have a kind of a comment and then a question. I just, I myself, I was born in 2000, so I kind of feel like I grew up in this version. Wasn't sure how that part would go. I kind of have this perspective that I grew up in a version of America that kind of had this like perceived idea of like coexisting and diversity. I remember the first time that I kind of felt like I had the opportunity to ultimately come into contact with a question like this was when a Obergefell was handed down. Because, I was, I think, probably 12 or 13. And for me, it didn't make a lot of sense. Like, I didn't understand why this was a conversation that we needed to have. And since then, I've kind of reflected on like my public school education. I don't think it was intentional necessarily, but we kind of frame these moments of expansions of civil rights as sort of being like the end point. Like when we passed the 19th Amendment, like misogyny was over. When we passed the Civil Rights Act, racism ended, and that isn't true. But I think some people, if they're not coming into contact with folks that have diverse backgrounds, they maybe become a bit naive to the realities of living in the country today. I don't know if you guys have comments on that specifically, but what I wanted to ask was, myself, I very much present as a straight white guy, and I don't, if you look at me, you don't think maybe that I would be somebody that was an advocate for issues like these. So for somebody that wants to be an ally, how can I best navigate these sorts of conversations? How can I present myself as somebody that can be viewed as a safe person? And ultimately, what can I do to be a part of these conversations and not sort of take them over either?
Yeah, an important part of being an ally is not to have all the answers, is to be there and to support and to not solve their problem, right? But you said something that's important. Listening is the best way. If you hear something that tells you somebody's struggling or is being, disproportionately treated or whatever, that's your opportunity to step in and say, hey, I couldn't help it over here. I've had similar experiences. And you want to reach out to them and say, hey, it's like to help me understand. I want to get a different perspective. I have my own ideas, but I want to get your perspective on how you're struggling with this, because I struggle with a few things. And then you get that dialogue going and they understand that you're with them and they can help you as you help them. But listening is the key, I think. And having that emotional intelligence.
Totally agree. And I think that you're already a long way there because you care, right? I think the thing to recognize, going to Steve's point, is that being an ally is a title that you earn, not one that you give to yourself, right? And I think that you earn that by actually talking to and spending time with the people that you want to support, right? And not necessarily going and having conversations for them or doing things for them, but elevating their voices. I mean, there's nothing worse than, a group of white people sitting around in a room deciding what everybody else needs, right? So it's opening up seats at the table. It's giving people a voice in, what's going to be their experience, within an organization or within, whatever the group may be. But, I think that it's wonderful that you aspire to be that. And I think that it's wonderful because I think a lot of times the onus falls on diverse individuals to be the bridge builders. And that's a heavy burden to bear, right? That's just the reality of it. So I think as much as you're willing to step up and try to build those bridges, that's a wonderful thing.
I think letting people know that you are ready to stand as an ally is important. It's a very uncomfortable thing to do, to kind of raise your hand and say, hey, I don't understand or fully know your experience, but I am acknowledging it and I respect it. That's hard to do. So letting people know that you want to be an ally is critically important. I think the other important part of allyship is believing what you are hearing from the people you want to support. And I know we spend a lot of time talking about race and gender, but we recognize fully that diversity has dimensions, marital status, whether you're a parent, all of those things create diversity within a community. But I think when you hear the stories of those persons whom you want to support, believe what they are saying to you. There's nothing worse than saying, this was my experience. And where it's like, that couldn't have possibly happened. There's no possible way. I just can't believe that. Well, yeah, I'm telling you. That's exactly what happened. So believe me when I'm telling you. So for me, those are the two most critical components.
You're just overreacting. You're taking things too personal. That's where you
So, thank you for that. Any other questions? Okay, so I've got one last question. How do we, in the environment that we are in now, and being DEI practitioners or advocates or allies, and with the assault on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and just the overall current environment, how do you help someone navigate all those pressures? Because it becomes, I've talked to many people in the field and those trying to do the work in their organizations, and it just gets harder and harder and more frustrating. And at every turn, it seems like something's being thrown against you, or you're taking 5 steps back when you know you're trying to do something good. What do you say to them, or what to be able to deal with that, all the pressures, and to work through it?
It has to be top down, and I'll give you a short example. I was Chief Diversity Officer for the City of Columbus, and I said, Andy, you have to shake the trees and I'll rake the leaves. If I come in there and shake things up or pound my fist on the table, I'm what they call the angry black man. But if Andy Ginther pounds his fist on the table and says, the first question out of my mouth, directors, when you have your annual review is, how did you do on advancing our DEI goals? Then I can walk in and be a support to help those directors do what they've been mandated to do. But you have to have an environment that sets the tone from the top, because everybody will feel safe in carrying out those DEI objectives. And as a practitioner, I used to tell people, the DEI department doesn't do your work in purchasing or in public utilities. You have to do the work. I help you carry your bucket of DEI to the finish line, but you have to own it. And so there has to be an environment where people are safe and confident to own the work and do it as they uniquely need to do it within their particular department.
Totally agree with you. I think this work is not for the faint of heart. It just isn't, right? And I think that you have to buckle up and know that you're in it for the long haul. And I think a huge part of that is protecting your own well-being, right? And, in this environment, I'll be very honest with you, I sort of struggle with, taking care of my mental health while also remaining informed about, what's going on in the world and how do you balance that. And I'll tell you, each day may be different. One day I may be 10 toes down, all in, watching all the details unfold, and then other days I may say, you know what, today I can't. Today I need yoga, or today I need a nap, or today I just need to, watch something that isn't, as mentally taxing. So I think also just realizing that this isn't sort of a sprint, it's a marathon, and making sure that you're taking care of yourself as a part of that, so that way you are prepared and you are staying in that marathon.
I think it's important to always look beyond the headlines, to research the issues so that you can be fully informed about what is actually happening versus what you are reading should be happening. That's critically important. And then, of course, I agree totally with protecting your peace. Some days it's just all too overwhelming and you don't want to hear about it, and you don't want to talk about it, and you don't want to have to live in it if you are a part of a diverse group that you feel is being attacked consistently. Just be okay with stepping away. That's my advice. And I just want to share one thing. There's this video on YouTube. It's titled Social Inequities Explained in a $100 Race. If you have an opportunity to check out that video, please do. It talks about how DEI looks in real time, the dimensions of diversity. And so there are a group of students who start at a race, and the person leading the exercise says, if these things apply to you, then take 2 steps forward. And you see how all of the students are staggered based on race. There were questions like, if you grew up in a 2-parent home, take 2 steps forward. If you never had to pay your cell phone bill, take 2 steps forward. If you didn't have to contribute to bill paying in your home, take 2 steps forward. And the person leading the exercise says, there is nothing that any of you did in this group to find yourselves in these predicaments, but this is the race that you have to run. So the people in the back are going to have to run a little harder than the people who are toward the front, but everybody has to run this race. If you have an opportunity to watch it, it's 4 minutes long, but I think it really helps to explain what DEI means, what social inequity means, and how we can start to address some of those issues.
That's a powerful exercise. It's also called the diversity line exercise, and it really is jolting.
Well, all right. No other questions? Last opportunity. How about a round of applause for our panelists? Judge Cocroft, Attorney Francis, Attorney Havens, we really appreciate you coming and being a part of our panel discussion. This is a discussion that we have quarterly here at the Franklin County Court of Common Pleas General Division. We appreciate the court for continuing this with our DEI committee that puts this on. And we're looking forward to our next lunch and learn. But you're always welcome to stop by and, you know, poke your head in at our future lunch and learns. But always we wish you to stop by and come down, visit us, and you all come on over. So we appreciate you once again for being a part of our conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you.